That's one fine-looking barbecue pit. Why doesn't mine look like that? Ah!
Asymmetrical horror games have been on a steady growth for some time. Dead by Daylight, Friday the 13th, Predator, Ghostbusters, hell, even evolved to some extent. But there's always been a fair few to choose from, with Dead by Daylight being the best out of the bunch.
He's on you.
Yeah, he's out.
Oh, you fucker!
Crawl.
Well, now we have another one with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but with already having so many asymmetrical games, and Leatherface already being an option as a killer in Dead by Daylight, is it really worth playing this game?
This guy. This is not my kind of guy.
If you've not played an asymmetrical horror game before, it's pretty straightforward. These particular games try to recreate the tension and horror from, well, horror films, where we sit back and judge characters' actions like why the hell are they in the closet, not diving out the window, and that's what these games try to set up, as you control the survivors and decide what they do, or you play as the killer hunting down the survivors, which works wonders when you're playing with friends. Now, just like Dead by Daylight and Friday the 13th before, Texas Chainsaw has players set into two teams, the survivors and the family. The survivors obviously need to escape and survive, and the family are the killers who try to track down the survivors and, well, kill them.
It's pretty standard, really.
And while Dead by Daylight, Friday the 13th, Predator, hell, every other game has generally had multiple survivors and one killer, it's a bit different here with Texas Chainsaw, and I'll get to that in just a second. But in other asymmetrical games, there's strengths and weaknesses to playing as the survivors and the killer. The killer's goal is to kill the survivors and are more threatening than the survivors, obviously.
Well, duh.
But each game has different mechanics. Dead by Daylight, the killer plays in first person and the survivors are in third person, so survivors are more aware of what's happening around them and if the killer's coming up behind them. Friday the 13th, Jason didn't need to put survivors on hooks and could immediately execute survivors, but there were a heap of survivors and they could even fight back to the point where you could defeat Jason. What I'm basically going at here is every asymmetrical game has a difference or a twist as to how they work, and a little bit of what's borrowed from each of them. Well, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a game created by Sumo Digital, who previously worked on Crackdown 3 and is published by Gun Interactive, who published the Friday the 13th game. And look, this game is pretty average at best, at least in my opinion, but it does have some unique mechanics and some fan service for fans of the original movie. The game has some 4 survivors try to escape 3, count 'em, 3 different killers, which is one of the game's different game mechanics. Now, survivors start in a basement, dungeon, underground tunnels of the map and need to escape the tunnels before escaping the area in general and winning the round. Now, survivors can find bone pieces, lockpicks, and general tools, if you will, to escape the opening area and to assist them to escaping the game, and it's a general dim-lit underground labyrinth while Leatherface roams around in the basement. Now, only Leatherface is in the underground area at the start of the round, while the other 2 killers are above ground setting traps and gathering blood. But back to the survivors. Now, they'll start in the basement hung up on hooks and they'll need to escape. However, Texas Chainsaw has an important sound mechanic in the game which will alert the family to where you might be. If you search through toolkits or bone piles too quickly, you'll make noise that will alert the family as to where you are. Now, there are also bone chimes, which are basically wind chimes that if you walk through them, they'll make noise and alert the family, as well as chicken boxes, which will make noise and alert the family. So survivors need to be careful with what's around them and how much noise they make, but it's worth noting too that the family can set off the bone chimes and set off the chickens. But if you make too much noise at the start of the game, you wake Grandpa, who is basically Lion from Rainbow Six Siege, and that when Grandpa wakens up, he'll scream, and if you move as a survivor during this period while he's screaming, he'll give away your position to the family.
Enemy drone incoming, starting the clock.
Once survivors escape the tunnel, they'll need to open an exit by using a fuse box, disabling a generator, a car battery, or a water gate, but it's worth noting that once the survivors escape the basement, they won't have to worry about just Leatherface, but the other 2 members of the family that are generally roaming around, as well as the Grandpa NPC who will give your position away. Now, the killers or the family are all generally pretty straightforward, with Leatherface, the hitchhiker, the cook, and 2 new characters made for the game, because the game only had the rights to the first movie, which just sort of makes sense. The family's goal is to find the survivors and kill them, but they can also feed Grandpa blood.
Ooh. Precious blood.
Now, whether that's from collecting blood from slashing a survivor who gets away, or by harvesting blood from blood buckets and bags around the map, this levels up Grandpa and he gets stronger and stronger from drinking blood, and he'll continue to scream, revealing survivors until he's fully leveled up, where he'll basically just constantly scream, constantly revealing where players are. So time isn't overly with the survivors. Each killer has different abilities, with Leatherface obviously having a chainsaw, but it needs to be revved and managed as it can stall. The cook can hear survivors if he stops moving and is facing in the right direction, but he moves quite slow. The hitchhiker can set traps, and the two new characters can either track footprints or spit poison.
Sure, whatever.
But just like in other games, the killers have a terror radius, and the screen will get a yellow and then red border outline whenever you're playing as a survivor and get too close to the killer. But if you're playing as Leatherface and you've revved your chainsaw, well, you'll still have that radius, but the chainsaw noise will also give away your position, if that makes sense. This red and yellow border for a warning sign that the killers are nearby doesn't really work for the game, in my opinion.
You're gonna peter out soon.
Get that bitch!
Heartbeats make sense for Dead by Daylight. Friday the 13th had the iconic and kind of funny chase horror music when Jason was nearby, which ramped up the atmosphere for the game, but I don't really know, man. The sort of red and yellow border for Texas Chainsaw didn't work for me, in my opinion. Now, if you've played Friday Dead by Daylight, you already know what you're in for. The Texas Chainsaw game, though, has more of the Friday the 13th feel than Dead by Daylight, and the killers don't need to place survivors on hooks to sacrifice them to spider-like creatures. So you can do some customizations as well with outfit skill trees and select certain executions for the family. But should you play Texas Chainsaw? It wasn't really for me, my dude. I had multiple issues with finding games, getting booted from games in the middle of the round, and what the fuck is this? While I'm all for people enjoying the games they like, and hey, if you like Texas Chainsaw, dude, I'm glad that you like it, but seeing review sites give this game stupidly high scores with having issues like this at launch is kinda concerning. Texas Chainsaw also doesn't teach you how to play the game. If you played other games like this, then yeah, it's pretty straightforward, but if you've never played anything like this before, you'll be shit out of luck, as you'll need to watch boring video tutorials on how to play the game, rather than the game giving us a interactive tutorial or being able to play against AI to get some practice in. The Texas Chainsaw game drops you straight in the deep end and forgets about you. And sure, you can say, well, survivors in horror movies are generally dropped into the events of a movie, which, yes, that's true. But if I'm playing a game, I'd like to know what the fucking controls are, or in my first game, I wondered what the hell the outline on the screen was. Before I knew it, I was killed and out of the game. Honestly, the only way I got around to playing this and covering it to this extent was by playing it with a mate who had to explain what the survivor's abilities were, who also had to explain what my objectives were as a survivor, and also had to explain why the survivors were trapped downstairs as Leatherface at the start of the round and we didn't need to worry about the other killers. So, on top of the game telling you nothing and constant bugs and dropouts, I struggled real hard to boot up this game. There was one instance though I was playing with a random online and she was quite friendly, and the game actually doesn't have a inbound sort of invite review system, so at the end of a round we both said yeah, let's keep playing together before the game ended and booted us out, and we couldn't find each other on Steam or Epic Games or anything like that. So if you're watching this, thanks for the great rounds. But on top of all these bugs as well, the game's frame rate drops to absolute arse when you're being executed, being attacked, or in most instances when you're sharing the same room with another player. Sure, a jitter here or there on the frame rate isn't too bad, but the frame rate here tanked harder than the adventures of Pluto Nash in the box office.
Did you enjoy the movie, sir?
Now, it's worth noting I don't think that this is a bad game from its design, ideas, or inspiration. I think that the state that the game has released in, with its constant bugs, crashes, frame rate drops, and the lack of any proper tutorials having the players have to figure out how to play the game, is a poor decision, both for the players and for the developers and publishers. I mean, I found a game where a survivor was moving around the map like The Flash, and he was an injured survivor too, so yeah. Texas Chainsaw feels incredibly rushed to get out the door, so then development on another half-assed rush horror game can release for another cash grab. At least that's my opinion with it anyways. Now, that's not to say Texas Chainsaw is all bad. There are moments of tension and suspense. Hiding around as a survivor while Leatherface hunts you down, especially at the start of the round in the tunnels, will get the heart pumping. The executions are cool and brutal, just like the ones in Friday the 13th, but there aren't as many options to choose from, which is a bit of a shame, but pushing a victim's face into a chainsaw blade will never not get a reaction out of me. But the level of dismemberment that the Friday the 13th game provided isn't here.
Think you can do that? Oh my god, you think you can do that? Yo, bitch!
Speaking of Friday, Kane Hodder also returns for doing the mocap that he did with Jason Voorhees, who played Leatherface in this game, which is also pretty cool. The music and score for the game is also kinda cool and helps you immerse yourself in the game, and that's when the game works, that is. And while the original Texas Chainsaw movie didn't have any supernatural element to it at all, having Grandpa as an assistant to point out where survivors are hiding is a nice touch, and it eliminates players who sit around and hide for the entire game. Thankfully though, Texas Chainsaw is on Game Pass, which is a great way to play and try out games without wasting money, because Texas Chainsaw just didn't work for me. If it worked for you and you enjoyed it, dude, right on, I'm glad you liked it, and there are a lot of laughs to be had if you're playing with friends, and as I've said on this channel multiple times, playing games with friends is always entertaining. But constantly getting kicked from games, the frame rate dropping, and the constant bugs and issues, I can't say I'd overly recommend this game, and it kinda goes to show that Dead by Daylight remains the king of the asymmetrical horror games. Now, if you got Game Pass, give it a whirl. If not, I'd say maybe wait for sales and wait to see if this game gets its bugs ironed out, and if Gun Media continue to support the game after launch. But whether your first Texas Chainsaw movie was the 2003 remake, or your favourite Chainsaw movie has been Mr. McConaughey's Adventures, always remember to play with each other and play with yourself.